Македонци и подпири Македонци, славно име непокорно.
Да се биде медијатор во грчко-македонскиот спор, тоа е голем предизвик. Предизвик бидејќи да се говори за име на една држава, за еден народ, тоа е еден историско значење, а не само тоа, тоа значи да се води сметка да не се наруши и повреди чувствата на народот кој го носат своето уставно или вековно име. Медијаторот Метју Нимиц, или амбасадорот Метју Нимиц, е мојот соговорник, меѓутоа е главниот стожер на овој голем проект Сите за и околу Македонија. Почитувани гледачи, почитувани пријатели на гласот на народот и на овој проект Сите за и околу Македонија, еве дојдов во Њу Јорк по покана на медијаторот и амбасадорот Метју Нимиц во неговиот апартман да го реализирам овој за мене историски проект кој верувам дека ќе ги исполни сите очекувања и без никакви воздршки ќе го задржи вашето внимание. Ќе го реализирам на англиски јазик и се надам дека ќе најдам на ваше разбирање. Mr. Nimetz, thank you for your invitation to realize this mega interview that will be focused on your mission, which is mediation in the specific case of the international politics and law, and that is the constitutional name of the country and its confirmation or modification. Allow me to begin our interview by introducing you personally and your career. First of all, your private profile. Who is Matthew Nimetz?
Oh, well, first of all, let me thank you for this interview, and you and I have gone a long time together, right? I think we first met in 1994, was it? And well, I've been at this a long time, but you've been a journalist for a long time, so we know each other in that context. Well, of course, I'm. How can I describe myself? I'm an American. I feel very proud. Born in New York, and I grew up here. Went to school here, and very interested in international affairs from a very early age, and was very fortunate early on in my career to go into the government. My first important role was in the White House under President Lyndon Johnson. That's back in 1967, 68, during the Vietnam War period, during a very difficult time in our country. And I was a staff assistant to President Johnson. I then also practiced law here in New York, was a commercial lawyer, and my senior partner was Cyrus Vance. And when he became Secretary of State, he invited me to come down to the State Department. I became counselor of the State Department and then undersecretary. And so one of my areas of work was NATO issues, Eastern European issues. I went to Yugoslavia. I was involved in human rights and the Helsinki Final Accord. I went to the Belgrade meeting in 1967. During that period, I met Tito and during his visits here. And I also dealt with all the Greek-Turkish issues. This was a big problem in those days, as you may remember. The Cyprus problem, the Aegean issues. And we in the United States, we had many issues with Turkey, many issues with Greece. So I got to know the region pretty well in those days in the State Department. That was 1977 to 1980. At the end of the Jimmy Carter administration, I returned to New York and I practiced law once again. And I had various local government jobs here in New York. I was a commissioner of the Port Authority. I was, for a while, I was helped the governor of New York. And then in the 90s, when after the fall of the breakup of Yugoslavia, the fall of the wall, and the difficulties that occurred with the issue of the name of Macedonia, President Bill Clinton asked me to become his special emissary for this position. That was in 1994. I think the reason was the people at the State Department, they knew me. They knew I had dealt with Greece. They knew I had dealt with the region. Mr. Vance knew me. Warren Christopher, Secretary of State, knew me, and they felt I would do a fair job. So I became the U.S. Emissary on this issue, 94, 95. Mr. Cyrus Vance, my old boss, he was the UN mediator, and we worked together. Of course, he was more senior than I was, but in a way I had a better job because representing the United States of America, I had a whole powerful country that supported me, whereas he represented the United Nations, which is very nice, but it doesn't have the power of a country. Well, we worked together on the interim agreement. Now I've done many other things in my life. I joined a investment firm, so I've been an investor around the world. I've been a lawyer. I've been a government official. But this responsibility that I have is for this issue is one that's very important to me personally. Very important to me personally, and I can go on if you want on this. Yeah.
How did you become a mediator, and what does a mediation mean for you in this case?
Yeah. Well, right now I'm the UN mediator. As I mentioned earlier, I was the U.S. Emissary, and well, a mediator is very different from an arbitrator. An arbitrator or a judge, and I once worked for a judge. Being a judge is a very nice position because you listen and then you say what the decision is, and for a judge, this decision is a decision. A mediator makes no decision. A mediator has to listen and try to see whether there are places where the two parties, well, sometimes there are more than two parties, but the parties can reach some accommodation. And I think it's a very difficult role. First, you have to keep the trust of both sides. If you lose the trust of the parties, if you try to be devious, if you don't tell the truth, if you're not honorable, if you're not fair, then you can't be a good mediator. So the second is to be creative, to look for opportunities for a solution. Now, obviously, in a difficult issue like this one, if it were easy, you don't need a mediator. You know, people say, why isn't this problem solved? I say, well, if it were an easy problem, it would have been solved. But when it's a difficult problem, it takes a long time to solve. So timing is very important. Patience is important. And so sometimes people say, you've been a mediator so long, are you disappointed? And I say, well, I've had many disappointments, but so long as the parties want to keep talking and there's a possibility of a solution, then it's worth proceeding, right? And we see in many places in the world where this doesn't work out. Now, how did I become a mediator here? So after the interim agreement in September 1995, I resigned my role in as a United States Special Emissary. There was no need. The interim agreement was in place. And the outstanding issue was still the name. And under the interim agreement, the Secretary General was charged with this, and Mr. Vance was the representative, so he kept working on this. But he was a good friend, my senior partner, and I would go visit him, and he asked me to help him a little bit. So I went back and helped him informally, and then I helped him a little more. And then his health sadly took a turn for the worse. And he had more trouble keeping the role. And so at one point he said he was going to retire from this, and he resigned. And in 1999, the Secretary General asked me to take his place. Now, both parties made it clear that that was acceptable to them. I would not have done this if either the government in Athens or the government of Skopje had said that they were not happy with me doing it. But since they knew me for quite a few years, and I think they both felt that I was fair and objective, they told the Secretary General that I would be an okay choice. And I thought it would take just a few years, but here I am, still working on this issue. So that's about the size of it. Yes.
Pastor Nimetz, let me express several questions which I collected from the Voice of the People, because, as you know, I'm author of a very big project, Voice of the People, who exists nearly 16 years in Macedonia. But it's a pleasure to me to address the question according to this crucial point issue, this name issue. The name Republic of Macedonia presents a state and national identity that incorporates the interests and obligation of the citizen, all political entities and institutions in the country. There is no alternative and no price as opportunity to discuss this issue is the attitude of all citizens of the Republic of Macedonia. What is your comment, please, Ambassador?
Well, Slobodan, I have to disagree with you. We'll probably disagree on a number of issues here. If there's no point in talking about it, then there's no point in having negotiations, discussions. So we have to start out by saying, first, this is a difficult issue where each side has a very strong point of view. Second, that these are two neighboring countries that need in the long term to have a good relationship and to get along, because if two neighbors don't get along and they're next to each other for hundreds of years, thousands of years, this is not a healthy situation. So one has to think about whether it's possible to resolve. And I know the feelings are very strong in your country on this issue. And it's a very unique issue. So for most people in the world, issues of a name, of a state, or other issues of identity don't come up that often, and are always very unique. So other people don't understand how strongly people feel. Trying to be objective and not being a citizen of either country, I go to both countries and talk to people, government officials, but also citizens, and I know how strong the feelings are. Of course, when one goes to Greece, there's also a very strong feeling about the name Macedonia and the Hellenic quality of that name, the history of that name, the civilization, and also some people's view is that there's no compromise possible, there's only one answer. But my view is that if you start off with the view that there is no point in discussing this because there's only one solution, then one doesn't get very far. So I understand the position, and then I think one has to say, okay, but let's be a little creative and open-minded and see where there might be some source of agreement.
The request of international community for Macedonia to change its name is irrational and absurd and present a blackmail and pressure on a small and peaceful nation that is intended to its extent. Is your comment?
So, well, I certainly agree that your country is a peaceful nation and a small nation and deserves a existence, more than existence. In my view, the reason I do this is because I think your country deserves to have a wonderful history, because your people are wonderful people and deserve to have a historical experience that's very positive. And then when I meet the young people, I just think of how amazing it is that they have their own country and their own culture and can grow in a democratic world in a Europe that's hopefully a positive environment for them. So I agree that the situation of the country. Where I don't agree is that discussion of this issue involves blackmail or pressure or words like that, which you've used. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's helpful. Throughout the world, there are issues, and people do express points of view and urge countries to make changes when it's necessary. Now, your country is a new country in the world. Not so new anymore, about 20 years old now, but in the course of history, it's a relatively new country. There hasn't been a historical nation state in this region, the Macedonian region, really ever in since the ancient days, and that those were not days of nation states. They were days of empires and personal empires. So this is something new, and the name of the state does have significance, and it has significance for your neighbors. So this is why this issue arose. As you know, the issue arose when the breakup of Yugoslavia led to the creation of several independent states, and the name taken by originally, I think it was Socialist Republic of Macedonia, and then changed to Republic of Macedonia in the first constitution of the state. And the Greek government objected to this on the grounds that most of historic Macedonia was part of Greece, and that this had irredentist aspirations that they believed were a threat. I don't want to get into the way things were presented in those days, but that led to the issue of acceptance by the international community of the name and the place in the United Nations in Europe. So I think I would not accept the word blackmail. I would not accept the word irrational and absurd. I would say this is a difficult political issue, regional issue that needs to be approached with goodwill on both sides.
The framework affair that for talks in the Macedonian-Greek dispute is a scandalous and absurd adventure, while the request, i.e. proposals of the new names, will remain a shameful present is annals of global diplomacy from the beginning of 21st century. What is your comment, Ambassador?
Well, Slobodan, you are making these these very extreme statements here, and I know you're trying to provoke me to some extent, right? You're trying to provoke me by saying this is absurd and scandalous and shameful. So I don't think it's shameful at all. I don't. If I did, I wouldn't have this job. And if your view is the view of your government, then they should tell me to quit. So I'd be very happy to quit. If either side asked me to quit, I would quit, because there's no point in being a mediator if people think so. Your government has never said this was absurd and shameful. They've always said this was a useful and constructive process. And so anything that is changed will have to be done, if there's a change, by the agreement of democratic countries. So if you have a democracy in your country and the other, Greece has a democracy in its country, and you reach some agreement, that's not shameful. And I think sometimes I have to say that some people think that if there's a compromise or an agreement, that's a sign of weakness. This has never been something I've understood. I think when there's a dispute and you reach a compromise, you reach an understanding, it's a sign of strength that you're able to reach an accommodation. It's not a sign of weakness. So I don't think it's scandalous. I don't think it's shameful. I think it's actually very honorable for people to try to urge the parties to reach some acceptance. And let me say that countries that press your country, your government to try to be creative here in a solution, they also press Athens and say to the government there, they ought to be flexible, they ought to be creative. So the international community, I think, has been fair to both sides here.
Yes. Macedonians believe that the international community will not allow today, in the era of democratic and human processes and principles, to provoke the absurd where the power, pressure and blackmail will dominate over the justice.
Yeah. So, well, I don't think there was there will be blackmail and pressure in a bad sense. I think the international community has demonstrated that it is very respectful of your country, your leaders, your democracy. Even when there's been disagreement, there hasn't been any international harm to your country. Take, for example, my country, the United States. Even though I represent the United Nations here, I do talk to the U.S. government. I also talk to the European governments and other governments that are interested. And they're all very concerned about what's going on in your country, and very positive towards the long-term future. So I would not feel that there's any blackmail involved, any pressure involved. There certainly is urging of your country to do the right thing, but I think you shouldn't fear that you will be pressured unfairly into doing something that's not right.
Basic, from where come idea to change the name of Macedonia, our state? From which sources, from where come idea Macedonia have to change the name?
Well, you start off by saying change the name. I think the view is people is from the very start the issue of the name was open if it had consequences that affected regional peace and security. And the United Nations, in its resolutions in 1993, Security Council came to the conclusion that this was an issue of regional concern, of peace and security, and that the name should be provisional in the United Nations system as the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Now that's not a name of a country, that's a provisional designation until the name is resolved. I sometimes to explain people, it's sort of like when a couple has a new baby, and the baby, they haven't yet given the name of the baby, so they say, this is the son of John and Mary, the son of John and Mary Smith. Now that's not the name of the child, that's just identifying the child, waiting till the name is given. You know, once the name is given, then you don't say this is the son of John and Mary Smith, you say this is James Smith, right, because that's the name. So provisionally this was the name. So it was not a case of to the international community that it was a change of the name. It was let's deal with this name issue in a way that avoids problems of security and peace in the region, and we'll have a provisional name in the international community. Of course, it was understood that the constitutional name in the Constitution was Republika Macedonia. This is in the language of the state, Republika Macedonia was the name in the Constitution. But this was not something accepted by the United Nations and not accepted by most countries initially. Now, various countries have accepted the constitutional name and use that, and many countries still do not. But so the idea of someone coming up and saying, let's change the name of another country, it's a little more complicated.
Yeah. Pastor Nimetz, as you said previously in the interview, you say that we are the young country. Yes, for a couple of months we celebrate 25 years of independence. But the people is not young, the nation is not young. She exists thousand years as identity Macedonians. Secondly, also you see some reaction of the Greek side that they mean that we have identical activity, how to say. Another case, actual Prime Minister or former Prime Minister Nikola Gruevski in one situation say for the Greek Tovima 3 points. Macedonia can have a unique about the name Macedonia. Secondly, Macedonia have a territorial pretension over the Greece. And the third, Macedonia, a factor for stability, as you see it about refugees, etc., etc. Can you make one answer according all those 5 things that I addressed, please?
Well, I'll do my best. The question of irredentism, of borders, of historic aspirations in this region are very complicated, and different countries view it differently. Now, if you look at the history of the region and you go back to the Ottoman days, there were many different people in this Macedonian region, you know, and there are different censuses, there are different books. I like to read the history, but I'm not a historian, and I think historians differ as to their view of the history of historical people, where they lived, or what historical rights there are, historical names. So I've always taken the view as a mediator that I'm a mediator under the United Nations resolutions to try to solve a political issue between 2 countries. I'm not the arbitrator of history. If I were, I'd be in the university, a historian, I would write a history book, and I'd have a point of view. I've looked at a lot of the history books, and they're very different points of view, and as you know, and I'm not going to ever get myself involved in a debate about history. I will say that coming from the United States, we are a new people. We do not claim that we are an ancient people. In your region, in the Balkan region, people like to claim their long history. In my country, people no, we don't have a long history, so we have a very short history. So we're very proud of our short history. So the fact whether people have been there a long, long time, or a very, very long time, or a very, very, very long time. And I've heard Albanians say how ancient their people were. I've heard Makedonski people say how ancient they are. The Bulgarians have their point of view. The Greeks have their point of view. The Vlachs have their point of view. And the other people. So, and my religion is I'm Jewish, so the Jewish people, of course, have a long, long history, and including in the region, as you know, in Thessaloniki, in the old days, in the Ottoman days, there was a very large Jewish community in the region, and it was only the Nazis who exterminated most of these, and in your country too. And your country was very good to protect a lot of the Jewish people. But so there are many different people there. So I'm not going to make a judgment about how long the people were there. We have to look at the present reality. So the present reality, there is a country. The constitutional name is Republika Macedonia. The name of the United Nations is former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. There's a dispute about the name, so this dispute ought to be resolved. The international community should be united in recognizing a name that's acceptable in your country, and get on with the development of the country and the region. This is how I view it. Whether that's possible depends on whether politically people are willing to do it in both countries.
We know each other nearly 22 years. First then when, as you said before, in previous time of our documentary film, when President Clinton announced that you will be assistant of Ambassador Cyrus Vance. Your Excellency, here I made the interview with you in 1996. You say in the first interview, it isn't the first, it was serial of interview. Macedonia will keep constitution name, but depends of Macedonians. What mean? And did you still yet have in mind that stance?
Well, what I meant was that your people have to make a decision. That you had a constitutional name. And no one from outside is going to take away your name or change your name. However, judgments have to be made, and your country, through democratic processes, has to decide how to help resolve this issue. And I think the proof is that we've gone now, sadly, over 20 years now since the more than 20 years since the interim agreement, without solving this issue. No one has used any force or pressure to make you change anything. Your constitution is still your constitution. But I do think that your government needs to work creatively with the Greek government to try to solve this, and then your people have to make a decision whether it's acceptable, because you are a democracy.
Yes. I'd like to turn the page of also the question which we have in my list of the question, but Can you really tell us something of beginner to make one historical momentum? Which person, which prime minister, which negotiator have you from what side? Good momentum or some bad or goodness to say, please?
Well, one nice part of my job is I meet a lot of interesting people, and I will say that both on the in the government in Athens, the government of Skopje, have had some very, very intelligent people who care a lot about their country, and who I found very interesting and fascinating. Where we had the most momentum, I'm not going to say that there was one or two times where we were almost very close, because sometimes there was momentum on one side and the other side was not really ready. You had periods when the government was going through difficult times in both countries, in both Athens and Skopje, and where the politics of the country didn't permit things to go forward. So at the very beginning, Andreas Papandreou was a very difficult personality, a very strong man, but he was able to reach the agreement on the interim agreement. At the same time, President Gligorov was also, I think, he cared a lot about his country. Of course, it was a brand new country then, very fragile. We had the issue of the Greeks stopping things at the border, but also Serbia was in disarray, as you recall, so that it was a very, very difficult time. And President Gligorov had to make some very tough decisions in difficult times, and he, I think, rose to the occasion in the interim agreement. Unfortunately, they couldn't solve the name itself at that point. And Mr. Vance and David Owen, who had worked with him on some of these issues, they reached the conclusion that let's try to solve all the other issues, get the relationship normalized between the two countries, and leave the name for later. Now, I sometimes wonder if we had gone a different route then and said, no, we're not going to have an interim agreement. We're going to go all the way. Let's sit here all day, all night, and try to decide, resolve the name issue as well. Whether that would have been a terrible idea or a wonderful idea, in history you never know the answer. I think that for a while I wasn't too involved, but President Tchaikovsky was I think a very highly intelligent person and provided good leadership. He was tough, and I gave him some suggestions he wasn't interested in. But I often think that if he had not had that really historically tragic airplane accident, he might have had a different role. I think we had an opportunity when under Prime Minister Karamanlis, when he did make the change in the Greek position, which is an important change from saying that that their position originally was your country should not have Macedonia at all in its name. And then they changed to say, well, it could have Macedonia, but it had to have a modifier. That was a significant change in the Greek position, and I think that we missed some opportunities in not taking more advantage. I think after the NATO meeting in 2008, which I think was sort of a tragedy, the way that whole thing happened, and not really fair to your country, your leadership. But that everyone should have come together right after that. I tried, but we were unsuccessful in coming up with something right then and there, because everyone was focused, NATO was focused. And we see today, I mean, we just finished the NATO meeting now of 2016, 8 years later, and they're saying the exact same thing. The communique today is the same communique from 8 years ago. And look at all the time we've lost. So I think that was an opportunity. I think the dialogue between George Papandreou and Prime Minister Gruevski, where they met for 8 or 9 times, they developed a certain rapport. They also had some back channel, conversations. There was an opportunity there that I think they should have, in retrospect, moved faster. And I wish they had included me a little more, and we would have made a push. I think that they felt they had more time. But then the economic crisis in Greece came along and diverted attention. And then George Papandreou had to leave office after this that plebiscite idea of his. This government fell, and Greece plunged into a real crisis, fiscal, economic, political crisis for a couple of years there. So I think that was a sad situation. But I think that was the only time when two prime ministers really had a sustained personal dialogue. I think that Prime Minister Gruevski had real mastery of this issue, and is a very strong political leader of his country. And I had many dialogues with him, personal conversations. I always found him very knowledgeable on the issue, very strategic, and I think that, of course, his positions weren't always the positions that I wanted him to take, but they were always, I understood his positions, and I think that he had the leadership ability, and has the leadership ability to negotiate something that the people of the country would respect. And on the other side, I was very interested in the Samaras, government, because Mr. Samaras was one of the creators of this problem. I mean, he made it a big issue back in the 90s. He was very vehement on this issue. And I always felt because of that, he had some responsibility to solve it. And he told me he wanted to do it, but he never maybe he wasn't there long enough, or maybe it wasn't high on his priority, but he was unable. But I do think he was a leader with the political strength to do something. So I think there have been some very interesting governments, and the present Syriza government in Greece and Prime Minister Kotzias has taken a personal interest in the relationship, has gone to Skopje. So I think the Syriza party has younger people who have a different point of view on this. So we've had some very good people. I should mention Prime Minister Bakayanas in Greece, who also had some interesting ideas here, and you've had some very good diplomats working on this. Nikolai Dimitrov and Yulevsky, now Namovsky in Washington. These are all good diplomats. So I think there have been a lot of good people working on it, but we certainly haven't reached a conclusion.
Yeah. You say very interesting things. I'm sure that our readers and our viewers will be excited about your answer. We have your nationality and our nationality have the same destiny. The Israeli at the same and the Macedonian people have the same destiny. They run to recognize the nationality, the religion, etc., etc. I bring you something, as you see, that some typical things which is coming from Macedonian church. We have church, we have name, we have identity. If we change the name, it is a people I'm mentioned, and I'm here to transmit in our documentary film and to ask you personally, Your Excellency, because it is a historical book, and your statement will be, our kids will be learned about your statement. The people say, if we change our name, we can change our identity. Did you share the feelings of the people according to what they say? We have the same destiny, your nationality, your people, and our people.
Yeah.
Also, and sorry, very shortly, a Macedonian name you can find 28, maybe 30 times in Holy Bible.
Yeah. Well, first of all, every people in the world has there are many identities in the world. So the Jewish people or the Hebrew people, they have identity, but it's a very different identity because it's a religious identity. It's not a national identity. It's not even a linguistic identity, except for the holy books. But I think there's a difference between the identity of the people and the name of the state. And I think that it's a misconception to think that the name of the state embodies the identity of the people. The identity of the people is developed out of the expression of the people, their language, their culture, their religion, their books, the way they think, the sports they play. It's not necessarily the name of the state, because, as you pointed out earlier, your people have a long history, but the state is only not even 25 years old. So the identity of the people were there, but the name of the state was Yugoslavia. The name of the peoples had identity when they were in a Serbian state. The identity of the people was there when they were in the Ottoman state. So if you take a person who's quite old now in your country, that person might have been born with an Ottoman passport, and then had a Serbian passport, and then had a Yugoslav passport, and now has a Republika Macedonia passport. It's the same person, the same identity, but they had different states. So I don't think that the name of the state is coincident with the identity of the people. And I will say that the Greek people have a long history and a great identity, and they had that identity back in other states, and there's still a diaspora of Greeks that feel Greek even though they're not in the States. So I think it's wrong to think that the identity of the people would be different if the name of the state was slightly different.
According to everything you say before, that you as assistant ambassador servicemen, the question comes about good service and mediation are two separate ways of dispute resolution. In good service, the party offering good service a third country or international organization or prominent figure, such as United Nations Secretary General has no right to impose a formal suggestion or proposal in terms of the direction which the dispute shall be settled, i.e. The third party shall act this standardly. Convening usually separate meetings the views and proposal of the party to the opposition party. In mediation, the third party activity accesses the parties in the dispute to reach an agreement, i.e. the mediator is authorized to offer suggestion and proposal about a solution to dispute. According to Resolution 817 of the United Nations Security Council of April 7, 1993, Matthew Nimetz has mandate to provide good services in the name dispute on behalf of Secretary General. Directly question to you, Your Excellency. Do you think it is beneficial that you have exceeded the authority of Resolution 817 under which you are mandated to provide a good service, while in reality you act like a classic mediator with your own suggestion and proposals for the name?
Yeah. Well, this is the first time someone has asked me that question. I've been doing this for 20 years, and so what you're asking me is whether I've exceeded my mandate as under the resolution 817, but also it's under the interim agreement, and it doesn't say good offices there. It's in the interim agreement. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it says that the issue of the name shall continue to be discussed under the aegis of the Secretary General. So I have convened the parties many times through the representatives, and I've visited both sides. And you're absolutely right. I've given them some suggestions, and I think if I had not given them any suggestions, there would not be that much to talk about, because the positions of the two sides haven't changed very much from the official positions. Now, so I don't think I've exceeded my authority. Certainly neither of the two parties has told me, please don't make any suggestions. Now, occasionally they've said to me, this is a difficult time in our country, we're having elections coming, or we're doing this. I think it's a good time not to make new suggestions or to have too many meetings. So I'm always very sensitive when the parties don't want something. But in fact, I think most of the time they've asked me to please give some points of view and let us think about it, because it's very hard for the parties to change their position, to say let's try this. But it's easier for them if I give a suggestion than for them to say, well, this is not quite right, but maybe if you change it, or we don't like this, but we might like this a little better. So I think that giving the suggestions that I have helped the process by making it possible for the parties to think about things. Sometimes people criticize me for not doing enough. Here I'm getting some criticism because I'm doing too much. But to be frank, I've been doing this so long, and if I didn't give some suggestions, I think that I would not be being responsible here.
Yes. Although the Security Council Resolution 117, 1993 and 845, 1993 required the Secretary General to report to the Security Council on the result of his good services regarding the name dispute. Why are two reports of the Secretary General to the UN Secretary Council of 26 May 1993 and 22nd September 1993 the only reports present to the Security Council by him?
Yeah. Well, the Secretary General reports on many things to the Security Council, and on this issue, I think of course, I talked to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He's very interested in this issue, and he speaks informally with the Security Council all the time. Whether he needed to make a written report is a decision for him and his office and for the Security Council presidency. And I think that given the fact that we've had no major breakthroughs, issuing written reports wouldn't have added very much. So I think the informal way of discussing this with the various parties has been adequate for this period. If anyone wanted more reports, we could give them. Unfortunately, we don't have enough good results to report.
Yeah. Ambassador Nimetz, although you do not have a mandate to make proposals because under Resolution 187 you are not mediator but have an authorization to render good service. Still, so far, within your mandate, you have come up with 3 proposals to resolve the name dispute, and they have not been accepted. Taken as all 3 cases, certain unfavorable proposal for Macedonia because she's being renamed, which has no grounds in general international law and United Nations law from a decade of hindsight. What is your opinion? Please, can you comment us about that?
Yeah. Well, you know what, because when I present ideas to the parties, these are confidential. So I don't put them out publicly. I've never put them out publicly. Occasionally, some parts of them have been released, and we all know that leaks occur from various governments, so who knows how these things get out. So some of the ideas I've presented have come out into the open. Maybe not the whole, maybe parts of them. And what you've described here are 3 sets of ideas, but in fact there have been more. And some of them have never been come out because they have been kept private. Because I make a lot of suggestions to the parties, and these are not meant to be the final answer to the question, but they're suggestions to make them think. And then they can come back and say this is not acceptable, this is acceptable. And as noted, 1 or 2 of these were of interest to one party, but not interest to the other. Well, when you're doing this type of work, it's very rare that you present something that both sides say, this is wonderful, right? Usually one side has a problem, and often both sides have a problem. So many of my suggestions have not been accepted by either side. Sometimes I think those are the best suggestions because neither side is very happy. What you're saying here is, here are some of your suggestions back to 2005, 2008, various things you suggested, and they weren't accepted. And how do you feel about it? Well, how I feel is I'm glad I made the suggestions. I'm glad the things people were thinking about. I'm very sorry that they didn't get more positive response and stimulate a more intensive negotiation. So what I think has been lacking is not so much that people have not really adopted my ideas, but that they haven't said, okay, I don't like it that much in this respect, but this part is good, maybe we can change this, and the other side says, yes, but if you do this, we need that, and you get a negotiation going. And this happened in the time of the interim agreement. We had very intense negotiation about each word. We haven't had that in recent years, which I regret. But I don't regret making some suggestions, like some things in here where I suggested Republika Macedonia Skopje, something like this. This was one suggestion which has not been accepted. But it was not a bad suggestion. It was actually, in my view, if people had accepted it back 10, 15 years ago, would have been a reasonable solution. But it was not accepted by one side, and in fact not accepted maybe by both sides. So it was a lost opportunity, and some of the other suggestions, whatever I suggest, you could find little faults with. I understand that. But if you start with the idea that you're not going to make any change at all, then of course, then anything I suggest is going to be received badly. So I think as long as the parties are talking, I have to keep making suggestions.
In your term, during the name dispute, it is expected to have encountered some unpleasant situation. Namely, in his daily briefing, dated July 23, 2014, Farah Haq from Office for Public Relations of UN Secretary General said, among other things, that the mediator Matthew Nimetz will be in Skopje 28 and 29 July, in Athens and 30 and 31st July. Then under the UN protocol, before the visit, you explicitly state, I will spend 2 days and nights in Skopje and Athens with top officials of both countries. In this context, on 28 and 29 July, you met with top officials in Skopje, after which you left for Athens, where on July 30 you only had consultation with the Greek foreign minister and immediately got back to New York. Although your visit to Athens was shown on normal light, rapid in a propriety diplomatic behavior. In fact, you were, forgive the expression, you were excellent on the very day after your arrival in Athens, where almost unnoticed you came and left without meeting with the Greek government top officials according to the official UN agenda, aside the fact that the Greek admitting of the UN protocol also in the great answered for the World Organization, because UN as will appears of provider good services in the name dispute under resolution 817, on whose behalf this done by Secretary General, the Chief Administrative Officer, who consequently approached you a personal, special representative. So ultimately, you don't represent the personality of the head of UN as such, but through him the organization as all the terms of provision of the good services of the dispute. Could we please this situation in column Nestle during your last meeting in Skopje, and that is July 2014?
Yeah.
And the question directly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In this announced tradition and states of subject of international order and the recent development.
But I think it's a different question, because I think that's it's a misunderstanding. I had a very good meeting in Greece, and the important meeting was with the foreign minister. Now, and every country is somewhat different with whom you meet, and so in Skopje it'd be a little different from Athens, but in this government in Athens, the foreign minister has a very important role, Foreign Minister Kotsias, and I had an excellent meeting with him, and then I met informally with Ambassador Vasilakis and other members. I had a dinner meeting that went on for several hours. So the fact that I may have only been there for a day doesn't mean that they were disrespectful, and I think it was very substantive. I should say that I've been dealt with respect in both countries, and the United Nations is very highly regarded in both states. And I should say, a few months ago, I met with Prime Minister Kotsias in Europe for several hours on this at his request. So I don't think if there's any implication that because I spent an extra day in Skopje and a little less time in Athens, that this is imbalance. That's not the case. Sometimes I spend more time with one person than the other. Maybe I go down to Washington and meet Ambassador Naumovsky. I don't make an announcement about that, but I meet with him from time to time. I met with Ambassador Vasilakis many times. So I try to meet as often as possible, but the amount of time, hours in one country or another is to me irrelevant.
In the ancient tradition of states as a subject of international order and the recent development of international law and UN history, customary international norms was built according to which each state entity that choose a title name of its own choice. Restriction of this right will be possible and justifiable only a state applied for admission to membership of United Nations with a name that is identical to the names of any of the existing UN member states. The United Nations Charter or any other international document, bilateral or multilateral agreement, has no provisions which enable the member state of contest or impose a name of other member state of the organization. In this context, there are neither international rules of the procedure regarding action of competence of the bodies that will be authorized to receive some kind of compliance allegation of countries against each other in order to dispute the name of the countries chosen by its people. UN history until the accession to the Republic of Macedonia does not know of any case of disputing the name of the country on the admission to UN, and worded the sovereign equality and independence of state as recognized international and legal principle to do allow the state to impose the name of another state. Moreover, states of subject of international law in the same rank are bound mutual respect of non-interface and each other internal affairs. Therefore, naming the name of the country as a matter of its international justification actually leads to interference of the internal affairs, which violates of the Charter, since the principle of validity to therefore should Macedonian continue to principle in the talks truth of the UN Guard services when the principles of which this world organization itself rest of violated. Can you ask something?
Yeah. So this is I've heard this argument before. It's a legal argument, and international lawyers can differ on it. This issue was resolved by the Security Council in 1993 when they did not accept the admission of the state under its constitutional name, Republic of Macedonia, but rather gave it a provisional entry under the other name. Now, the Security Council did that because it made a decision that this was an issue regional security and peace and security between neighbors. It was persuaded in 1993. Now, I was not involved at that time at all, as you know. I started on this in 1994 when this was all behind us. So I had no role in that at all, and I understand the argument that the name of the country is an internal matter. But I have to make a couple of points. One is, no one is imposing a name on the country. What the negotiation is about, what the discussions are about, is whether there should be some modifications that will solve this problem. And if there were, it would have to be voluntary. It's not imposed. It's a question of, is there something that that can be voluntarily accepted? No one is going to impose a name. On the other hand, there's no entry, as you see it, into NATO. There's no entry into the EU. There's no entry into the United Nations under a different name if something is not changed. So these are realities in the world. You have to face the reality of the world. So what this question asks is, maybe don't participate at all in these discussions because the United Nations itself is not acting properly. Well, if you don't have negotiations through the United Nations, then you'll have to find some other way to have discussions, right? So I think that rather than being upset with the fact that this is an issue, I understand people are not happy with that, but to recognize there is an issue, there are neighbors, we have to deal with the neighbors, so let's sit down and see whether we can find a solution, rather than argue about whether there's even a necessity for having discussions.
Matthew Nimetz, on 17 November 2008, the Republic of Macedonia filed a lawsuit against Greece, requesting from the International Court of Justice to establish that Greece had violated Article 11, Paragraph 1 of the interim agreement signing between Macedonia and Greece on September 13, 1995. The breach, according to the Republic of Macedonia, was committed by Greece, objecting to the invitation for Macedonia to join NATO and the Bucharest summit on April 30, 2008, in circumstances where the alliance would address the Republic of Macedonia under the provisional name the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. The proceeding ending with the upholding of the Macedonian compliant verbally the court by the allegedly behind decision, which was announced on December 5, 2011, ruled that the defending Greece violated the interim by acting country to Article 11, Paragraph 1 of the interim agreement objected to accession of the Republic of Macedonia to NATO in Bucharest summit. What do your opinion on the decision of the court in The Hague, which has not been respected until today, although it is legally behind it, please?
Yeah. So I followed that court case with great interest and read the decision. I should make it clear that my mandate at the United Nations does not include entry into NATO. I mean, NATO is a separate organization. It has nothing to do with the United Nations. And the decision of NATO to include a new member is totally a decision for NATO. How NATO should have reacted to this decision by the International Court is something that people have pondered over, and I don't want to make a judgment because I'm a UN mediator. I'm not involved with NATO matters. but I can understand the frustration in your country over the fact that you received a positive decision from the International Court, and nothing in the real world has changed accordingly. My answer to that is we're dealing with international realities that we have to understand in our system of nation states and world organizations are based on decisions of national governments, and NATO is made up of national governments, and they made a decision in Bucharest. They made a subsequent decision, and they made a decision this week in Wales that they will they want your country as a member. They are very happy with the role that you play in a lot of the NATO activities and operations, but that until this issue is resolved, they're not going to make you a member. Now, that's the message that this organization is sending out, and it's sending it out because the leaders of the nations have reached that conclusion. So, whatever the International Court says, we live in a world in which international law is very rudimentary. It's not very powerful, international law. Now, I'm a lawyer. I wish we lived in a world where international law was very, very strong. But the fact is, it's not very strong. So I think this is something you have to recognize and get over, and now deal with the problem. Thanks.
Let me add something according to what you say before a couple seconds about that. You're a lawyer. We respect you so much. You are with your professionalism, etc. According to international law, can you say international law, this situation, it is public opinion and opinion of an analyst. It is only international, only on the paper, under the table, and not respectable. What do you mean? Where you have force, you have justice, international folk in our languages. Another case I like to say, according to the statement of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, when Kam visited Macedonia before a couple of years ago, he said, for name issue, identity issue, these values, no have a negotiation, nowhere, including and United Nations. Can you say something about that, please?
Well, when you say about international law not being strong as a lawyer, I regret that. Within a country, it's one of the aspects of having a nation state. You have a legal system, and in our country here, with a Supreme Court, and makes a decision, and that's the decision. People respect it, and if the court says this man is guilty, take him to prison, the marshals in the courthouse take the man off to prison. But in the international system, we don't quite have that. We have a few steps in that direction, but we don't have. Now, in this case, the court itself did not give a remedy. It made a decision about its interpretation of the interim agreement, but it did not give a remedy. And part of the reason is that the International Court cannot tell NATO what to do. NATO is an organization of states, and it has its members, and it makes its members who it wants. And they made a decision on this issue of they'd like your country to be a member, but B, it's not going to happen until this name issue is resolved. So that's what this organization has said, and there's nothing much the court can do about that. So I think that's the reality of the situation, and the EU situation is somewhat different, but has a similar aspect to it. So that's something that has to be factored in a real life situation. I think as a mediator, I try to be realistic, and I don't want people to live in a world of imagination or perfection. If you want to live that way, you can, but it doesn't help in the real world. It's like if you want to go out and buy something but you don't have any money, you can't go to the store to buy something. So you have to be realistic. You need the money first, then you go to the store to buy something. Here, if you want to get into NATO, NATO says solve this problem. So if you want to be realistic in the real world, you sit down and say, okay, I want to get into NATO, I want to get the EU, I want to have good relations with my neighbor. Let's see if we can solve this problem.
Master Nimitz, it's just like blackmail then?
I don't think that's blackmail. Blackmail is a nasty word. It's the reality of the world. You want to be a part of a club, you have to get along with the members, and the members have sent you a message saying solve this problem. They haven't told you change the name to this, change the name to that. We're going to mistreat you, but if you want to join us, then let's solve this problem. That's if you call it blackmail, then you're going to be very unhappy. If you call it the international community sending you a message to solve some problems, and by the way, they also send Greece messages, work on this problem, try to solve this problem too. So
Mr. Nimitz, let me express also a statement from General Secretary. He was very clear that all the countries who constitute the international court, I mean all the members of NATO and EU, must respect the order of international court. Now they are, sorry for my words, my vocabulary, but they are blind with eyes.
Well, I was actually with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon when he came to Skopje. It was a very good meeting. He really enjoyed it a lot. He had a very good meeting in Ohrid with President Ivanov, and then he came to Skopje, met the Prime Minister, and addressed the Parliament. So it was he was very interested in the country, and asks me many times when I see him what's going on. He cares a lot about the country and feels very bad that this isn't solved. He knew the issue very well because he had been Foreign Minister of South Korea. And as Foreign Minister of South Korea, he had to deal with the issue of the name of the country and recognition. And, there's still an issue with South Korea on this issue. He cares a lot about it, and he cares about international law and following the rules. But he's also, I've been at the meetings with him and your leaders when they come to New York, and also I was at the last meeting when he met with Prime Minister Tsipras and Foreign Minister Kotsias, and raised this issue with them, with the Greek side. So he does follow this issue carefully.
Can you express us about how you estimate evaluation the process of the name issue about starting Butos His Excellency, which I already made interview, also the Kofi Annan and last Ban Ki-moon. Can you say something about that, about the mediation? How could you incorporate them? Something to express for all the readers and viewers?
Yeah. Well, first I'd say that all three Secretary Generals understood this issue, cared about this issue, felt it was an important one, and very frustrated by it. I feel very bad because when Ban Ki-moon came into office, he called me and said, come to my office, and he said, Ambassador Nimetz, I know this issue very well from my days in Korea. Do you think you can solve it quickly? And I said, I hope so. That was how many years ago now? And now he's leaving office. He's leaving office and it's not solved. So he's disappointed. And when he met, every year he would meet with your high government officials and the Greek government officials. And he always raised this issue. He said, can't you do more? Can't you solve it? But he didn't blackmail. He didn't put pressure. He didn't. So I think that Kofi Annan was a strong personality. But of course, he was very preoccupied with other issues. Iraq, we were in different times, and of course, Ban Ki-moon also faces many serious issues in the world. And what happens is, Secretary General cannot deal with everything, So this issue, he would be much more willing to deal with it if we were getting closer to an agreement. But unfortunately, it won't happen during his time frame, I don't think.
How about Boutros Ghali?
That was more before I was really very involved, because Cyrus Vance was mostly involved with him. And so I really didn't interact with him. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, very interesting question. These days, this month, United Nations have to elect the new president, general secretary. We have a member, Dr. Serjan Kerim, who won the presidency of the General Assembly, 52, I mean, when he also make one, no revolution, very carriage addressing, he say, the name of the country, Republic of Macedonia. Afterwards, immediately make one storm, reacted towards our neighbors, etc. Can you say something about, also you have communication with Dr. Serjan Kerim as a Minister for Foreign Affairs, also in the presidency?
Yes, I first of all, I have great respect for Mr. Kerim, Ambassador Kerim. He's an international statesman of a serious person, and I had a number of meetings with him over the years here in New York and others. I remember a dinner meeting with him. If you want to know, I think that was a mistake that he used the term Republic of Macedonia in the United Nations in his official role as presidency. And I think it had a bad effect in Greece because it made them and other people feel that your country was not respecting the decision of the Security Council that in the United Nations the name of the country was former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Now, what he was doing, he was introducing the Prime Minister of his own country. I think Prime Minister Gruevski was coming to speak. And so he, with the presidency, had to introduce him and put him in a difficult position. And, many of us made suggestions. We knew this was coming, and I think, to be frank, if you want my view, what he should have done is say, I now have the honor to introduce the Prime Minister of my own country, period, without saying the name. Or he could have not been present. There were vice presidents also who were there, so he could have been not there, and that the vice president introduced Prime Minister Gruevski. But he used his position to use the constitutional name, which offended people and offended the Greeks. I think that was. I think he was in a very difficult position, personally, but I think he made a strategic mistake there myself. But that's my own personal view.
Your Excellency, 135 countries recognize Macedonia under the constitution name. It is named approximately 85%, maybe 90%. Our more 4.5 billion people on the planet. How can you say apologize why you recognize the people ask, how can you say for the country, the state, 136, that's 136, when they recognize under our name, how can we say if somebody expecting to have modification of our constitution name?
It's a very good question. I can understand the view of people who say we should not change the name at all. I can totally understand that, and that is an alternative to go forward the way we are now. I mean, and not make any changes. It would mean, unfortunately, continued friction with your neighbor, Greece. It would mean continued issues with the EU and with NATO. So people have to make a choice, and that certainly there's wide acceptance of the constitutional name. Of course, most countries in the world don't know much about this dispute, and they're so preoccupied with other disputes, other problems. This is not a big problem for most countries. So that when they are asked to use your constitutional name, they say, sure, of course we'll use your constitutional name. But whether it's strategically important for the country to solve this problem or to put it off. I think, one strategy was, and I just discussed this with Ambassador Tashevsky, who was your first negotiator, wonderful man, good friend of mine. I miss him a lot. He died a few years back.
Yes.
But I used to go to his house. His wife would make a nice dinner for me. Wonderful people, but his view in the early days was, let's put this off, let's not press it, let's see how the world reacts. And many countries accepted the constitutional name, and it got acceptance in the press and other places. So that was a strategy of weight, but it had some negative consequences too. Which with the EU process, and I think we lost. The country lost a historic opportunity. I remember saying, I forget who was your president at the time, but when Bulgaria and Romania were joining the EU, Branko, and I said, you can join at the same time as Bulgaria and Romania. You'll be the smaller country, you go it quickly. This is the time to join the EU. And you never know about the future. Join now. Let's solve this problem now. But it never got solved, and it was delayed. And now we have an EU where it's in disarray, and Britain is leaving it, and there's no appetite for new countries. Now, I think they would still want you as a member, but it's not the same. And we could have done this 10, 15 years ago if we had solved this issue. So waiting a long time has its pluses, getting more acceptance by more countries, but it had its losses.
Yeah. Your Excellency, the Republic of Macedonia has so far preferred the political approach to the name issue, and thus has led to name becoming a subject of political talks.
I think the question of whether there's a legal solution here has been raised a number of times because of the frustration over the failure of the political talks. And the issue, though, is so far, I don't think there has been a legal solution to what is actually a political problem. And this is one of those things in the world that we talk about where there are political issues and there are legal issues. Now, if Greece were willing to have some type of arbitration about this or other type of thing, but so far that has not been on the table. The idea of going to the United Nations and approaching it from a legal point of view, I've seen some of the papers. I don't think it's very persuasive in one sense. They would have to go through the Security Council. Security Council is a political instrument.
Yeah.
They passed these two resolutions in 1993, and to change the name would require a new Security Council resolution. So I'm not sure how legally one could change there. But even if one could do something legally in the United Nations context, the EU and NATO, we've seen, and the question implies that you haven't tried the legal approach, but you have tried the legal approach in the International Court of Justice, done a very credible job arguing the case with very good lawyers, and won the case, but it hasn't solved the problem. So, and that's because it's primarily a political issue. So I understand the frustration, but I don't see a solution legally.
Yeah. Your Excellency, your colleague, if I say, Ambassador Robin O'Neill, also will be involved in this the commentary field. And it's come pre-expressed question of the analyst from them, addressing to you. Can you be so kind, please, to answering? The first, with your experience over 21 years of seeking the resolve the name of the Republic of Macedonia by mediation, do you believe that the Greece is generally interested in negotiated solution, or Greece only interested in preventing or putting off resolution of this so-called problem, which is created in this first place because it knows that the only final answer must be general international acceptance of Macedonia's chosen name?
Yeah. Well, that on the first question, do I think Greece wants a solution? I do think Greece wants a solution. What solution they will find politically acceptable is another question. But I think the Greek government recognizes that in its own interest, it needs to have good relations with its neighbors. It has improved the relationship with Turkey over the years. It used to be a terrible relationship. It's still not a perfect relationship. Probably never will be a perfect relationship given the history and the configuration. The relationship with Bulgaria has gotten much better over the years. The relationship with Albania has gotten much better over the years. So the last immediate neighbor is your country, and they recognize that to be a successful country in the region with leadership potential and, of course, economic issues, they want to have a good relationship. They can't have a good relationship until this is settled. So they do want to settle it. However, for the reasons we know, they feel strongly that some solution to the name that meets their requirements is a prerequisite to having good relations. Now, what's interesting to me is that if not for the name issue, I think the two countries would have wonderful relationships because the people actually like each other. They go back and forth even now. Greeks love to come up to your country for skiing and shopping and tourism. Your people like to go down to Thessaloniki, to the beaches, down on the coast of the Aegean. And there's a lot of trade and business even now. There will be much more. So I think there'd be a very good relationship if this issue is solved. I think the Greeks would like to solve it, but I think they have a real consensus, all the parties, because I've worked with New Democracy, I've worked with PASOK, and now I've worked with Syriza. They all have a common policy, and I don't think that unless there's some solution that meets some of their requirements, we will get a solution there. And so this is just a reality. That's my view on the Greek side, and of course they don't need to solve this problem as badly as your country needs to solve the problem. So that's a difference.
Do you agree that in the light of your experience over the past 21 years, the government of Macedonia should now to go to United Nations to request for the formal recognition of the Republic of Macedonia under the name it is chosen, which is therefore its proper name under the international law? That need not preclude further negotiation over the name if Greece then requests, but it would mean that the negotiation would then take place on the firm juridical basis with the legal name of the Republic of Macedonia properly recognized.
Yeah. Well, it's always been known that your country has the right at any time to go to the United Nations and say, we no longer want to use the provisional name former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. We hereby request that you use our constitutional name, Republika Makedonia, translated Republic of Macedonia. Given the 1993 resolutions, this would go to the Security Council. In my view, this is my understanding from the legal staff at the United Nations, and so the Security Council would have to initially decide, and the General Assembly would have to decide. And this would be a high-risk approach, but your government would have to test in advance with the Security Council permanent members whether there's any chance of this being successful. So this would be the challenge for the diplomacy of the country, and it is a possibility. And I've often wondered what would happen if this were done, but it would certainly be a confrontational approach to dealing with it, and the question is whether there would be support from from members of the Security Council for this type of approach.
Your Excellency, once the United Nations has recognized Macedonia as the Republic of Macedonia, what further action could be taken to reassure Greece that Macedonia wishes to be good friend of Greece and has no wish to disturb Greece or claim the Greek territory? You must have a very good understanding of the nature of Greek affairs from your conversation over the past 21 years.
Well, of course, there's a disconnect between the two countries on this issue of a threat, because I've never heard from a credible leader in your country any intention or desire or irredentist feeling on territory of a neighbor, including Greece. Yet the Greek, from a Greek perspective, there's a historic fear, and they go back with examples from the Greek Civil War period, from various Tito statements, and from some irredentist statements by maybe non-governmental groups, but also the way maps are portrayed of the historic Macedonian region and other examples. And I would say that in my experience, one of the issues that is not well understood in your country is how sensitive the Greek feeling is to some of the historic statements, setting up of statues, the historic role of Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great and that civilization as a Hellenic civilization, and a sense that of historic appropriation, which is a threat to the Greek culture and state and self-identity. So when we think a lot about the identity in your country and the possible loss of identity, one has to realize that the Greeks also have a sense of identity. They're very proud people of their history and culture. They fought in many wars to create and preserve their country, and they have a feeling sometimes of pressure on their country and identity from neighboring countries, not only from yours. So I think the answer to this question is if there were a solution on the name issue, the assurances on integrity for territorial integrity, for respect of sovereignty, and for a historical heritage, both ways would be important. But not only just saying it, but trying to feel, maybe meetings of historians, meetings of students, being careful about school books. I mean, what does the school book say about the Greek state, about the issue? We know, the Balkan Wars that divided up this area between Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, and the Ottomans withdrew from Europe, and all the trouble there, the Greek Civil War period. There are a lot of sensitive historical issues that are brought up and brought up in each country in a way that casts negative aspirations to the others. So a lot of work would have to be done on this, and maybe with I always felt that with the name issue were solved, you would also have another agreement, like the interim agreement, but a final agreement, which would also, again, reinforce the fact that the two countries will live in peace, have no territorial aspirations toward the others, want friendship and peaceful relations.
Yeah, Master Nimetz, you also, if you remember, at the beginning I addressed some short paraphrase from Prime Minister Gruevski, who already addressed interview for Tomic, who very clearly say that Macedonia have no territorial pretension under the Greece territory, and secondly, he said Macedonia have an exclusive right about the name Macedonia, and as I say, according to your previous statement about stability, prosperity in the Europe, which very carriage come from Europe side, that Macedonia is great pillar for stability for of the Europe, not only for Macedonia, about migrants, refugees crisis. You see the new proposal which come from Voice of the People, according to many analysts, to solve this issue. The issue is to use the formal Irish Republic of North Irish, for example, Republic of Macedonia, to be a clear distinction for the territory which have our south neighbor of province. in constitution, according to the constitution, Goda, which is actual ex momente. What do you think about this proposal? I mean, it is very great solution and finalize that this issue is banal, if you agree with me, 25 years at most, because first of all, as we know, is temporarily was acronym FIRE, but we exist and live now for a couple of months, 25 years, and the people are very tired, trust me, and people want to go
I know. The people are very tired. I'm very tired.
Yeah.
So we want to we want to end this. We talked about the British and the Irish had a name issue for many years until the EU, because the British would not accept Republic of Ireland because it implied the whole island, and the Irish would not accept United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So they wouldn't accept each other's names, for a while. The names are very sensitive, I just give you an example. When I was in the State Department, we used to call this body of water the Persian Gulf. And the Arabs objected. They said they call it the Arabian Gulf. And the Iranians, they call it the Persian Gulf. So if you were in Iran, you would say the Persian Gulf. If you were in Saudi Arabia, you would call it the Arabian Gulf. So we just call it the Gulf. So sometimes you hear about the Gulf, because no one wanted to call it the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf. And there are other areas like this. I should just tell you that we have a sea in Asia called the Sea of Japan. But the Koreans, they don't call it Sea of Japan, they call it the East Sea. And they will not allow a map in the country if it says Sea of Japan. It has to say East Sea. So these are not countries, but there are many places where names have a significance. So I think I don't want to comment on the so-called Irish issue or different, because we've talked about many names. You have in here, you've raised with me some of my prior suggestions where I've given a few different possibilities, and I don't want to comment on one possibility versus another possibility. If the two sides are ready to have a serious talk, they now know many possible formulations, and we can reach some conclusion there. But I'm not going to today say which one might be better than another one.
This is our documentary film. We have the going camera. We have embargo until we decided to publish it, and because I'm sure that I will keep normally this is confidential. Can you say which is the best solution for you to solve this issue? Because normally it will be historical book, and something more. You're American. I ask you also. By the way, first of all, which is the best solution? Some formula, some proposal, how to say, for both sides, without to go to identity, because it's holding things. Because as you see, our friend from Great-Britannia, it's not part of European Union, and it's good to sacrificing something holy, which I haven't.
Look, the UK may have to change its name again, because, for example, it's now United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Well, if Northern Ireland decides to leave, so they'll have to change it there. If Scotland decides to leave, Great Britain was created when England and Wales joined Scotland. Before that, it was England. Then they added Scotland, so they call it Great Britain. Now, if Scotland leaves, they'll have to call it something else. So they change. They may have to change their name, and other countries change their names. Czechoslovakia is now Czech Republic. Now they say they may not like Czech Republic. They may want to say something else. I'm not going to tell you what I think the best solution is, because to me, the best solution is one that's acceptable to the people of the country. They feel good about it. I don't think there's one solution. That's a perfect one. But I think there are solutions. Clearly, Macedonia is a critical thing. People are a part of Macedonia, but the issue is there are other pieces of Macedonia in Greece and in Bulgaria, and your country is not the only Macedonia. So I think some type of geographic modifier is not a terrible solution. I've made a few suggestions there, you know that. It doesn't change the identity, in my view, to think about some things like that. So I'm not going to give you a preferred thing. It's not my decision. It's a decision of your country to decide whether it wants to work something out with its neighbor and with the international community.
Yes, actually, because I repeat again, it's not changing plastic to go in television. It will go in the book.
No, I understand, but who knows when?
Some no licitation. I can use the word. Some upper North Macedonia.
Yeah. Well, I suggested. You remember, I suggested at one point Upper Macedonia because the Macedonian region is a large region, and you're in the northern part or the upper part. So I think that's not a bad solution, and it's not insulting to say that's a geographic modifier. Upper Macedonia, North Macedonia. I once suggested Vardar because of the river, Vardar, Macedonia. So I think those are possibilities. There are other names also, formulations that might work and not in any way disrespectful.
But this geographic, I would say, to be before the Republic of Macedonia.
Well, this is look. We've discussed it before. We've discussed it afterwards. We've discussed it in the front of Republic. We've had many discussions on various names, where they are, how they're used. So I don't want to get involved here with all the discussions. They've been hours and hours of discussion.
Yeah.
But I think, to be frank, it's the issue of the identity of the people is a different one from the, this name of the state. So I think that you can have a very feeling very good about the identity of the people in the European context, and have a name of a state that everyone feels comfortable with. It's not at all invidious, and get on with building the country.
Yeah. Also, the question is directly: if this modification we discussed just can not be go inside to identity will guarantee to no change in identity?
I think so. I think the identity is what the people call themselves. That's not a United Nations issue. It's
document everything?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're only talking about official use. You understand this. We're not saying what people use in books, what people use on television, what people use at home, what people use in business. We're just talking about what people use in official use, on passports, on identity cards, we call ourselves here Americans. Of course, there are many other Americans, South Americans. People in South America call us Norte Americanos. They call us North Americans because they feel it's different. So, I think the identity can be preserved. Yes.
Former Secretary of State, Ambassador Lawrence Eagleburger, already addressed for the program Voice of the People, which editor am I. He said the name dispute is unnecessary and unjustified. Macedonia was called the way during the former Yugoslavia, and then it's not case any problems said, and now this is a crazy legend of American diplomacy, as I say, Lawrence Eagleberger.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Lawrence Eagleberger was a great diplomat and a wonderful person. And I spent a lot of time back in my State Department days in his office in Belgrade when he was ambassador, and just loved talking to him and staying at his house, and it was just a wonderful man. He loved Macedonia. He was very there as a young person during the earthquakes in Skopje, and cared a lot about the area. And of course, he was a great supporter of your country. So, very sympathetic. I don't think he's totally right that there was no issues between the Yugoslavia and Greece. There were many issues between Tito, Yugoslavia, and Greece, especially in the days of the Civil War in Greece, which is one of the reasons why in Greece the Civil War period, which is not that long ago, is still part of the concern for historical reasons. Anyway, Eagleberger had his point of view, and we miss him, but I can't say very much more.
Yes. When we say about just Dr. Srdjan Kerim, we know Article 4 for United Nations. It's very clear. Every country have to decide which name they which kind of name they will apply or to continue it in United Nations. Your Excellency, we know each other 22 years. You are very famous lawyer and mediator in the politics and the war policy. Macedonia was part of Yugoslavia. Sixth Republican to part of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a very crucial point where made ratification of the document of United Nations in all the parliament, including Macedonian parliament. That means Macedonia was part of United Nations under the name Socijalistička Republika Makedonija. It's nebulosa. When it's a nebulosa, we apply again, and we have to find another godfather, so in the international community, and to give us, it is the public opinion, very shame name, formal Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, the state does not exist. Tell me please, also this is very important, and this time Macedonia have very big professor for international law, ambassador, etc. Where is this misunderstanding in somebody very clear make very big tragedy for Macedonia? I speak to you as an ambassador, as an American, as a lawyer.
Slobodan, it's a unique problem in world politics and history and law. So what can I say? It is a mess, and I feel really, one of the reasons I have to do this job, and you know I don't get paid, I get paid $1 a year, you know. So I've done 22 years, I've made only $22. This is all, I do it because I care about the people and hope to be helpful in solving the problem. What can I say? People make decisions at times, and sometimes they make decisions that are look expedient, look right at the time, and turn out not to be the right decision. Yugoslavia was falling apart. There was a war in Bosnia. There was a war in Croatia. People were dying. Solving this name issue, I believe, and I was not involved at that time, was not the top of the list. It was the other issues, and this was a way of temporarily solving it. No one thought it would take this long. People thought it would be solved very, very quickly, and in a matter of months. So I feel bad about it, but this is where we are, and now the job in international politics is to solve problems, right? We can go back and say we could have done something better, but we're now here, 2016. You need a good government in your country that can sit down with the Greek government and try to solve this problem.
I ask you again, as a lawyer, as American, as intellectual. It is very clear. Child step, how to say, or broke the resolution, also called the document Article 4 in the United Nations. One country, 2 times to apply to be member. How you see that things? And by the way, it's normal now, Macedonia, as the ambassador Robin addressed the question to you. You already answered. What you say? Can Macedonia and United Nations to give permission, Dr. Srdjan Kerim, to be the new Secretary General about this mistake, about the penalty and the damages? It's not only Srdjan Kerim to be General Secretary of United Nations, but in general, United Nations, international community to have in mind that Macedonia, again I reply, have a territorial pretensions under the Greece. And here is very interesting, the second question. We have 2 momentum. Cyprus is very good friend with Russia. Another case, America is very good friend of Macedonia. And they proudly do things because Macedonia is very good friend with America. What we have here, first of all, can you answer the first part of the question, and afterwards, can the Russia have also some to push up forward Cyprus to solve this issue without the damages, without identity change? Because in the Macedonia, only the identity is a crucial problem, nothing more. Because the people are scared. I present you Macedonian Church. How can you say Upper Macedonian Church? It's not logical. You agree with me? And the people want to die as Macedonians. Dear Excellency, because this is a historical book, you student will be learn about your statement. And I like in this book the people to know and to remember Matthew Nimetz as a very real, and as I know that you're a friend of Macedonians and you support Macedonia and you support Macedonian people because you know each other 25 years. And can you address completely one good estimation about this all by part of questions, please?
Srdjan Kerim's candidacy, I think this is, I think he's a very respected international statesman. So I think he will have a lot of people taking him very seriously. The Secretary General role is a political issue for the region. You know, there's an aspect of what region it's from, and then what country it's from, but also the nature of the individual. And I think there's some very good candidates. So ultimately, it's the support of a lot of different countries, plus the support of the 5 permanent members. So I have no prediction. I'm not going to predict who's going to win, but I think he's a very serious person. I criticize what he did in that one case, but I don't think that that's a determinative aspect of it. That's that's one thing he did that I think was a mistake, but other people I don't think care very much one way or the other about that.
The question about to bear about American Russia.
Yeah, so I think everyone would like this issue solved, because and the Russians have not been major participants, but they do care about the area, and so whether they would, the Russians have a good relationship with Greece, and the Russians have a good relationship with your country too, a Slavic country, former Yugoslavia. So I think the Russians, like the Americans, have relationships with both countries and want a settlement of issues, but are not going to get too involved pushing. I've talked to many of the countries involved, Germany and Britain and France and United States. All of them really care a lot about this issue, and neighboring countries care. I mean, Albania cares, and Serbia cares, and Slovenia, Bulgaria. They all would like this issue solved, but no one is going to put a lot of pressure on you and a lot of pressure on Greece. It's too sensitive. So they will urge you to work on it, but I don't think you're going to get enough pressure to solve it. I think ultimately you need a very strong and intelligent prime minister and government that can sit down with Greece and strong Greek prime minister and government and talk it through really intensely and reach some solution.
And for the end, one conclusion completely.
Well, I think one of the reasons I'm so interested in helping to solve this issue is that your country is a young country, and I'm a very proud American. I remember when our country was a small country, and we had leaders who had to solve some very tough issues with Great Britain, who we just had a war with, and with France, who we had disputes with, and with Spain, and with the Indian tribes. And we were a very fragile little country, and a lot of people predicted the United States would not last. We were a little republic in a very strange place. Your country also, although your people are a historic people, your country is a new country in a very dangerous world, in a very dangerous region. So you need to solve some problems. You need a good government. You need real democracy, and then you need leaders who are willing to sit down, make some hard decisions with respect for your country and its long-term future. And to me, the goal should be peace with neighbors, part of Europe, part of the North Atlantic community, and focus on educating your young people and building a wonderful, wonderful country for the future.
Ambassador Nimetz, thank you for joining us, but you say, did we have the real good politics who can go forward and to solve this issue? Did you see someone? Did you see someone politics according, because also it's very important when you say President Gligorov, we have also one minister for interim, for foreign affairs, Farshkovsky. It was 1995, 94. Mr. Gligorov say he was provoked for Minister Farshkovsky about some corruption. He say some General Grilakis give $1 million for Gligorov to change the name.
Well, I don't think money has any role in politics, and that goes for all countries, including my country, where we also have issues of I don't know about that event in 94, 95. I don't remember it at all. First of all, your leadership in your country, and I've met with many of your leaders over time, and they disagree among themselves, and they have all the political issues, but most of them really care about the country, and they're not going to sell the name or anything else for money, and they won't be permitted to by the people. So I wouldn't. If that occurs, I just don't, believe that that's realistic now. You do need to solve some of your political issues now, which is not my concern, but to get a government that is a strong government back, that has support in the election, parliament that's working, that we can now get back to work on trying to resolve this issue.
Ambassador Matthew Nimetz, thank you so much about your participation in this historical book, this historical documentary, which the name is Everybody About and Around Macedonia, which Greek pillar is your name. I'm sure that our student and the history of Macedonia will be rich with one name like Matthew Nimetz, or mediator these past 22 years. I wish very big and strong health to you personally and for all of your family. I'm very happy because very soon you become new grandfather for...
Oh, thank you. Well, I've known you for 22 years, so we've gone a long way, and I have such respect for your country and its people, and I've met so many young people who are so terrific and forward-looking, and so that's what motivates me is to help solve a problem and make sure your country is a great success. You know, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
I'm sure that you anytime courage, because I mean that our south neighbor is not be jealous or to be angry. It is noise outside because we realize that in you are a resident. I'd like to say, can you say, because many times you say Macedonian because you are American, American recognized Macedonia, our constitution name 2004.
I know. It's so difficult for me because as a UN mediator, UN representative, I have a real tough problem. My toughest problem is talking and going to the countries and dealing with this without using the name of the country, because if I use Republic of Macedonia, then I'm in trouble on one side. If I use former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia all the time, I get in trouble on that side. And it's too difficult. So, and if I use just the word Macedonia, that's not correct either. So I have a real problem. So what I've done over these many years is try to avoid using the name, and then in my discussions I use Athens and Skopje, not Greece and Skopje, Athens, the two capitals, because everyone agrees that Athens is the capital of one country, and everyone agrees that Skopje is the capital of the other country. So I try to avoid using the name, and I've been successful 99 time, but it's very difficult. It makes my life torture. It is torture to talk because I can't use the adjective very well. You know, it's very hard. But I would tell you that the most important thing in my role is to keep the trust of both sides. And if I don't keep the trust on both sides, and one side thinks I'm too favorable to the other, and the other side thinks I'm too favorable, then I can't operate. So the American political leader can say Republic of Macedonia because this is recognized in the United States. But I'm officially a United Nations person, so I use former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Did you know that, I'm so sorry because I interrupt you, that since 1988 in Greece you can't say Macedonia or Macedonia. Macedonians, immediately they go in jail. And why is something transpired?
You know, first of all, I don't think they go in jail. They don't go in jail.
But however, consequence.
For a political leader, it has a consequence. So they have the same problem I have when they want to refer to your country. They don't have the right words. So my answer to that is it's very important to solve the problem. Very important to solve the problem so that we don't have these problems anymore. Even communicating, communicating is so difficult. Sure. I just wanted to show you my study and